Have you ever imagined coming home just a few hours early, only to discover that everything you believed about your life was a lie? What if I told you that in less than 30 seconds, one ordinary afternoon destroyed an 11-year marriage, uncovered a $1 million conspiracy, and changed one man's future forever? Stay with me until the end, because every twist in this story is more shocking than the last. And the final courtroom reveal is something no one saw coming. Before we begin, if you love emotional stories filled with betrayal, revenge, and unforgettable justice, subscribe to Leon Drama Stories and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Now, let's begin. My name is Ethan Carter. For 11 years, I believed I had the perfect life. A beautiful house, a successful consulting business, a wife named Olivia who always smiled whenever I walked through the front door. People used to tell me how lucky I was, and honestly, I believed them. Looking back now, I realized something terrifying. The biggest lies never look like lies. They look like comfort, routine, trust. Every morning started exactly the same. Olivia would make coffee while I checked emails. She would kiss me goodbye and remind me not to work too hard. Then I'd drive to my office downtown, spend 12 hours solving problems for clients, and come home exhausted. Life wasn't exciting anymore, but it felt safe. At least, that's what I thought. Then came Tuesday, a day that looked completely ordinary. At around 11 in the morning, I was halfway through a presentation when my biggest client suddenly called. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said. "The board meeting has been postponed until next week." Just like that, my entire afternoon became free. It almost never happened. For a second, I thought about staying at the office anyway. Then, another idea crossed my mind. Olivia had been telling me for weeks that we barely spent time together. Maybe today could be different. Maybe I could surprise her. I stopped by her favorite bakery and bought a box of warm chocolate croissants. Then I picked up fresh flowers. Nothing expensive, just white lilies. They were her favorite, or at least, that's what she always told me. As I drove home, I couldn't stop smiling. I even imagined her reaction. She'd probably laugh, call me crazy for leaving work early, and we'd eat lunch together for the first time in months. Sometimes, the happiest expectations lead to the darkest endings. At exactly 1:17 p.m., I pulled into my driveway. Everything looked normal. Her car was outside. The curtains were open. Nothing felt unusual. I grabbed the flowers with one hand and the bakery box with the other. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed something strange. The front door wasn't locked. Olivia never left it unlocked. Never. I told myself she probably forgot. It happens. I pushed the door open. "Olivia?" I called out. Silence. Then, a burst of laughter echoed from upstairs. Not just Olivia's laughter. A man's laughter. I froze. For a moment, my brain refused to understand what my ears had heard. Maybe the television was on. Maybe a repairman was fixing something upstairs. Maybe. Anything except what I was beginning to fear. The flowers slipped from my hand and landed on the floor. The croissant box tilted slightly. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every instinct told me to walk away. But another voice, a much louder voice, demanded the truth. I took one slow step toward the staircase, then another. The laughter stopped. The house became completely silent. And just before I reached the bedroom door, I noticed something lying on the hallway floor. A man's expensive leather shoes. Shoes that didn't belong to me. In that exact moment, I realized my life was about to change forever. I stared at those polished black leather shoes. They were expensive. Italian, if I had to guess. Definitely not mine. For a few seconds, I just stood there, hoping there was still some logical explanation. Maybe Olivia's brother had stopped by. Maybe a client was visiting. Maybe. But deep down, I already knew the truth. My heart was beating so hard it almost hurt. Every step toward the bedroom felt heavier than the last. The hallway suddenly felt endless. I reached the half-open door. My hand trembled as I slowly pushed it open. And then, my entire world shattered. Olivia wasn't alone. She was standing only a few feet away, wrapped in another man's arms. The flowers I'd bought for her were still downstairs. The lunch I'd planned, the surprise. Every beautiful thought I'd imagined on the drive home disappeared in an instant. Neither of them noticed me at first. They were laughing, smiling, completely comfortable, as if they had done this many times before. Then Olivia turned around. The smile vanished from her face. Her eyes grew wide with fear. "Hey, Ethan?" The room fell completely silent. The man stepped away from her, but didn't look embarrassed. Instead, he looked annoyed, like I was the one interrupting his afternoon. For several seconds, none of us spoke. I couldn't. No words would come out. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't throwing things. I was simply broke. Finally, Olivia whispered, "This isn't what it looks like." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was the most ridiculous sentence I'd ever heard. I looked around the room. 2 glasses of wine sat on the bedside table. A suitcase lay open near the closet. There were plane tickets sticking out of a travel folder. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just an affair. They were planning something. I looked directly at the stranger. "Who are you?" He didn't hesitate. "My name is Daniel." No apology. No guilt. Nothing. I turned back to Olivia. "How long?" She looked down at the floor. How long, Olivia?" "Barely above a whisper," she answered. "Almost a year. 1 year. 365 days of lies. Every business trip. Every late-night meeting. Every fake smile. Every 'I love you.' None of it had been real. I should have walked away. I should have left the house. Instead, I asked one question that changed everything. "Why?" Olivia opened her mouth, but Daniel answered first. "Because she stopped loving you a long time ago." His words were cold, calculated. He wanted to hurt me, and for a moment, he succeeded. But then he said something even stranger, something that made me forget the affair completely. He smiled and said, "Honestly, Ethan, you finding us today actually saves us time." I frowned. "What does that mean?" Daniel slowly walked toward the dresser and picked up a thin blue folder. He held it in his hand, then casually tossed it onto the bed. It landed right in front of me. I opened it. Inside were copies of bank documents, property transfer forms, business ownership agreements, and legal paperwork with my name printed across nearly every page. My stomach dropped. "What is this?" Daniel crossed his arms. "It's your future." Olivia finally started crying. "Ethan, please, let me explain." But Daniel interrupted her again. "No point hiding it anymore." Then he looked straight into my eyes and delivered the sentence that made my blood run cold. "We weren't just planning to leave you. We were planning to leave with everything you own." I stared at the papers. Some carried what looked like my signature, but I had never signed them. Others listed Olivia as the future owner of my company. There were authorization letters, power of attorney drafts, even documents connected to my personal investment accounts. It was impossible. Or at least, it should have been. I looked at Olivia. She couldn't even meet my eyes anymore. That's when I realized something terrifying. This affair had never been just about love. It had been the first step of a much bigger plan. And if I hadn't come home early that afternoon, I might never have discovered it until it was far too late. But what I did next would turn their perfect plan into their worst nightmare. I stood there, staring at the documents. Every page felt like another knife in my back. The affair hurt. But this was something else. This was betrayal with a plan. I picked up one of the papers and looked closely at the signature. At first glance, it looked exactly like mine. But the more I studied it, the more I noticed tiny differences. The last letter wasn't shaped the way I always wrote it. The pressure marks were different. Someone had practiced copying my signature. Again and again. I slowly looked up at Olivia. Did you forge these? Tears streamed down her face. She opened her mouth to answer, but Daniel stepped in front of her. You don't have any proof. His confidence surprised me. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't scared. He acted like everything was already under control. That's when something inside me changed. A few minutes earlier, I had wanted to scream. Now, I wanted answers. Real answers. I took a deep breath. Then I did something neither of them expected. I smiled. Not because I was happy, because I had made a decision. I wasn't going to lose control. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. Instead, I quietly placed the folder back on the bed. I've seen enough. I turned around and walked toward the bedroom door. Behind me, Olivia called my name. Ethan, please. I didn't stop. Daniel laughed. That's it? You're just leaving? I paused for a second without turning around. No, I said calmly. I'm simply giving you both exactly what you think you've already won. Then I walked out of the house. The moment I sat inside my car, the emotions hit me all at once. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I wasn't crying because my marriage was over. I was crying because I realized the woman I had trusted for 11 years had been pretending for much longer than I could imagine. After a few minutes, I wiped my face. Then I called the only person I knew would tell me the truth. My lawyer, Michael Harris. He had handled every business contract I'd signed over the past decade. He answered on the second ring. Ethan, everything okay? I took a deep breath. No, I need you. Within an hour, I was sitting across from him in his office. I placed the blue folder on his desk. He opened it without saying a word. For nearly 10 minutes, he carefully examined every page. The room was completely silent. Finally, he leaned back in his chair. This is serious. How serious? He looked directly at me. If these documents had been completed, you could have lost almost everything. My stomach tightened. But, he continued, they made one very big mistake. I leaned forward. What mistake? Michael slid one document across the desk. These signatures are convincing, but they're not legally consistent. He pointed to several tiny details only an expert would notice. The angle, the spacing, the ink pressure, even the dates didn't match. Then he smiled. They thought they were smarter than everyone, but greed always makes people careless. For the first time that day, I felt a tiny spark of hope. So what do? Michael closed the folder. We don't confront them. We let them keep believing their plan is working. I frowned. What? They already think they've beaten you. Let's make sure they stay confident. He opened a notebook and started writing. From this moment forward, you will act exactly like a heartbroken husband. You won't accuse them. You won't threaten them. You won't mention these documents. You'll apologize if necessary. I stared at him in disbelief. You want me to pretend? He nodded. The bigger the lie they believe, the harder they'll fall. Over the next several days, I followed every instruction. I moved into a small apartment. I answered Olivia's messages politely. When she claimed she was confused and needed space, I simply replied, I understand. She thought I was defeated. Daniel thought he had already won. Neither of them knew that Michael had quietly contacted a forensic handwriting expert, a financial investigator, and even the bank's fraud department. One by one, pieces of their plan began falling apart. Then, exactly 2 weeks later, Olivia made her next move. She filed for divorce, and hidden inside that divorce filing was the final piece of evidence Michael had been waiting for. The moment he saw it, he smiled. Then he looked at me and said, Congratulations, Ethan. They've just destroyed themselves. The morning of the divorce hearing arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before, not because I was afraid of losing everything, but because I knew this was the day the truth would finally come out. As I stood outside the courtroom, I noticed Olivia and Daniel walking toward the entrance together. Neither of them tried to hide it anymore. Daniel was wearing an expensive suit, smiling as if he had already won. Olivia avoided looking at me. For a brief moment, I remembered our wedding day. The promises, the dreams, the life we had built together. Then I remembered the blue folder, the forged signatures, the lies, and just like that, every trace of sadness disappeared. Inside the courtroom, Olivia's attorney confidently argued that she deserved half of everything. Our client supported Mr. Carter throughout his career, he said. She is entitled to a fair division of marital assets. I remained silent, exactly as Michael had instructed. The judge turned toward my lawyer, Mr. Harris. Your response? Michael calmly stood. Your Honor, before discussing property division, we'd like permission to introduce new evidence. The judge nodded. You may proceed. Michael placed several folders on the evidence table. The first contains a forensic handwriting analysis. The second contains financial records. And the third contains electronic communications obtained through legal discovery. Olivia's confident expression vanished. Daniel leaned forward for the first time. Michael continued. The handwriting expert concluded that multiple legal documents submitted by Mrs. Carter contained forged versions of Mr. Carter's signature. A quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. Then Michael revealed something I hadn't even known he had found. The financial investigation also uncovered several unauthorized attempts to transfer company ownership and personal investment accounts using those forged documents. The judge's face became noticeably serious. Olivia's attorney immediately stood. Objection, Michael calmly replied. We also have email correspondence. He handed printed copies to the judge. The courtroom became completely silent. Those emails were between Olivia and Daniel. They discussed fake signatures, hidden bank accounts, selling my company after the divorce, even splitting the money once everything was finished. One message stopped everyone cold. Daniel had written, once he signs the final papers or we fake them, will disappear before he even realizes what's happened. Olivia covered her face with both hands. Daniel looked completely stunned. For the first time, neither of them had an answer. The judge slowly closed the file, then looked directly at Olivia. Mrs. Carter, is there anything in these documents you wish to deny? She tried to speak. Nothing came out. The silence said everything. After a long pause, the judge announced that the divorce proceedings would continue, but all disputed financial documents would be referred for a criminal fraud investigation. Every attempt to transfer my business was frozen immediately. The forged paperwork became evidence instead of weapons. Within weeks, every fraudulent document was declared invalid. My company remained mine. My investments stayed protected, and Olivia walked away with far less than she had expected. Daniel disappeared from her life almost as quickly as he had entered it. Once the money was gone, so was he. Months later, I drove past the same bakery where I'd bought those chocolate croissants. For a second, I almost stopped. Then I smiled and kept driving because I finally understood something. That afternoon hadn't destroyed my life. It had saved it. If I hadn't come home early, I might have signed papers I never read. I might have lost everything I'd spent years building. Sometimes, the worst day of your life is actually the day your future begins. And sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't screaming. It isn't fighting. It isn't making someone suffer. The greatest revenge is letting the truth speak for itself. Thank you for watching. If this story kept you hooked until the very end, let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's place? And if you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists, betrayal, revenge, and satisfying justice, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Leon Drama Stories, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next unforgettable story. Until next time, stay strong, trust wisely, and remember, one unexpected moment can change your life forever, but the truth always has a way of finding the light.